You are listening to Journeys with Rebecca Radio with your host, Rebecca Jernigan, your tour guide into discoveries. Coming to you live simulcast from the heart of America to around the globe via the World Wide Web, terrestrial radio, satellite, and podcast. Let's journey together into the realms of the unknown to the known in search of enlightenment, knowledge, and truth.
Good evening. I am here in the heart of America, broadcasting live and heard on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, Studio B, being simulcast at wolfspiritradio.com, and heard at journeyswithrebecca.com. This is your host, Rebecca Jernigan, and you are listening to Journeys with Rebecca radio show. And welcome to Friday night, the Journeys with Rebecca live broadcast, and tonight is really going to be a great night. I have on the show with me tonight, Wendy Kennedy. And for those of you who don't know who Wendy is, she really, or you do know who she is, she really doesn't need any introduction. But for some of those who may be unfamiliar with her, is a bit of information, background information on Wendy. She's been channeling for almost 20 years now. She's been working with a variety of beings from different star systems and dimensions. Now, back in the early 90s, she began having visions, and like most people, she didn't really understand what she was experiencing. So she did some research, and along the way, she came across channeling. Not really knowing what it was, and certainly didn't know anyone who did it. She just knew she was supposed to be the one that did it now. So she read what she could on the topic, worked with some of the exercises in the books that she could find, and then she had her first breakthrough about a year after she began with automatic writing. Now, after about a year of channeling via the automatic writing, her abilities had strengthened to the point where she was hearing the words well before she was writing them down. So down went the pen and paper, and that's when the ninth dimensional Pleiadian collective came through, and she affectionately calls them, as most everyone else does, is the P's. And they were waiting on her to begin channeling verbally before working with them directly. So she was answering the call. So tonight we have Wendy Kennedy in the studio with us, or actually on air with us, I should say. And we're going to be talking to her as well as the P's here in just a little bit. We'll be taking questions a little bit later in the show, probably within the first hour. And I'm going to give out that call-in number here in just a little bit. And we're also going to be taking your questions in the chat box, and you can find those on all of the stations. You can find the chat rooms at freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, at wolfspiritradio.com, and also at journeyswithrebecca.com. We have monitors in there. And if you are posting a question for Wendy or the P's tonight in the chat room, please be sure to put it in all caps. Don't get your questions in too early because they'll kind of get lost in the shuffle. But put them in all caps so we know that they are a question for the guests tonight. And please remember that all of these radio stations are commercial-free and listener-supported. So use the support button that you find at freedomslips.com and the donation button found at wolfspiritradio.com. And please don't forget to visit my website, journeyswithrebecca.com, and there you can sign up for the free newsletter. It's in the upper right-hand corner, very easy to do. It's on every page because it's a static article that's there that you can just go in or a static form that's there, and you can just go in and fill it out. And I try to send them out about once a week, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on any changes or events or situations that may arise. And I have my reading special is still going on, and you can get to that from the appointment page, so please do check it out. But without further ado, what we'd like to do is go ahead and get Wendy Kennedy on the show with us. Good evening, Miss Wendy.
Hi, Rebecca. Good evening, everybody.
So how did you like that for an introduction? I haven't done that in a long time.
Very thorough and in-depth. I was like, oh, yeah, that was my journey.
Website. Well, we were talking about basics, right? This was so funny when you was talking about that. And I was like, Well, isn't that funny? They made me go back to your website before we even got started tonight and, kind of share the story about how you actually got started.
Yeah.
So we are really back to basics but enhanced to basics, I think, because we have obviously a much better understanding of all of it. But please tell us, what have you been doing? What's new? And anything that you'd like to share with the audience tonight. This would be great.
A few things coming up, and I guess I'll go ahead and tell you about those, because as we get a little further and I start to channel and they start to give me information, I get a little forgetful when it comes to practical stuff. So,
understood.
Coming up, I have an event on Sunday. It's a group session with the P's, a 2-hour group session, and that's online. And that is from 10 a.m. until noon Pacific. And there's more information about that on my website. And the web address is higherfrequencies, that's plural, .net. And then on Tuesday, May 6th, I am joining Milan Lubinsik, who is hosting a telesummit called Soul Awakening in honor of the launching of his new book, Island of Souls. And that includes myself and Dr. Eric Pearl and 9 other amazing speakers. And that is free. So that is from 12 until 1:30 Pacific. And, I know it's right in the middle of the day. So if you can't check in during that time, you can always register for that. And that you can get the audio recordings afterwards. And so that's great. And also, there's a new tuning in project. That there's an Indiegogo, I'm blanking on the word, crowdfunding for, and there's and that you can find on Indiegogo, and again, it's tuning in now. So lots of good stuff in the works. And you asked what I've been doing in my spare time, because I know a lot of people have been like, "Where have you been?" You just kind of dropped off the face of the earth. And there's a lot that's going on in the background, a lot of new information, new beings coming in, and I've been working on a book, so that's taken a bit of my time, and just lots of new creative ideas and things that I want to do. So, just like everybody else, time feels so compressed to me, and there just aren't enough hours in the day to get through everything that I want to get through. So, it's just going back to the basics and trying to be in the flow.
Well, a couple of points that I'd like for you to expand upon here while you were talking is, you said you've been in contact with some new beings. Interesting that over the past many months here, really since almost the beginning, I think, of 2014 here, Wendy, there's been a great deal more of activity. I felt a real huge surge in, some people would call it paranormal, contact information, whatever, however somebody's perspective is that they look at that. I hate to cubbyhole it because everybody has an idea of what that may mean, but there has been a ton more beings that just have popped in, and just like, really, it's like they're peeking around a corner going, "Oh, hey, hi."
Yeah.
Just thought I'd stop in. You're like, "Well, who is that?"
Yeah.
And then they just kind of leave, and you're kind of going, "Okay, now that was strange." And it's happening with way more frequency. And I noticed, and I really wanted to talk with you about the April thing, because I think it really kind of maybe flows into this. April was an extremely significant month, astrologically speaking, energetically speaking. It has the dynamics of a rebuild for all of humanity, in my opinion. And I'm sorry?
That's a great way to put it, a rebuild.
That's just what it feels like to me. I mean, it feels like it was extremely magnificent in the potential that came through in the month of April. And these beings that have shown up, these ones that just pop in and say hi, some of them stick around, and it's almost like having a fireside chat or something. They just kind of sit down and go, "Well, can we talk?"
Yeah.
And then it's just like, you're like, "Okay, well, this is strange even for me, but sure, what would you like to talk about?" And they share pieces of information, and then they here, let me tell you my role in history, or let me tell you my role in humanity, or who we are. And then they just leave. It's just, just a short period of time of information, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you've been experiencing as well?
Yeah, there have been a couple of people who just kind of popped in, just, hey, we wanted to let you know we're here, we're supporting you. I'm like, that's great. Who would you be?
Okay.
Thanks for the support.
Okay, good.
But yeah, and it definitely is time for an upgrade, and I felt that with April. April was kind of clearing the decks, and as we're moving into May, it feels like all of that new stuff is starting to come online. And with some of the new beings, there's a new group called the Keepers of Frequency that came to me back in December of 11, and they just introduced themselves and said, we're going to be doing some work. And you've got a ways to go, you've got some integration to do, and there's new information we're going to bring, but you have to up your frequency first. And so that's really what I've been doing all along, and especially once we got past 2013 and into 2014, it just felt like this never-ending cycle of upgrade. And I know a lot of people have been, we'll put it under the guise of being sick for April. But I think with all these astrological alignments, it was just a lot of clearing that went on for people. And I know definitely for myself, I was sick for most of the month of April, and I was very clear that it wasn't really a cold. It was me clearing out stuff at a very deep level. And hopefully, as we move forward, things will feel a little bit easier. But, these new beings are coming in with kind of a new layer. It's not that the information is vastly different than what we've been getting. It's just a deeper level of understanding. So when you say it's a rebuild, I think that's a great way to put it, because it's not that we're using any different kind of building blocks. It's just kind of shuffling them around and putting them in kind of a more efficient, more useful order.
I agree, and I think you talked about use the term layering, and I think that the presence of these they're new to us. They're not new, but they're new to us. These beings that we're unfamiliar with up until now are really just adding to the, I guess you would call it more of a dimensional aspect. So they're deepening, widening, strengthening, upping, the whole basket, so to speak, of that portion of our existence. And the idea that they're here, you said, we're here just to support you. And really, that's kind of what I got with, with those that, the one, really seriously, it was literally like a fireside chat. I swear I was, it was like transported into this little space. There was this fireplace and a couple of wingback chairs, which are just not my favorite. I was like, okay. And here across me is like two other different beings. I'm like, and how can I help you? And okay, I think they liked President Carter's fireside chat. They were kind of stuck in a time warp or something. It was funny. I was like, well, it's cozy, I must say. It was like this little pomp and circumstance. Mm-hmm. Really, I'm sorry I have to giggle because it really was funny. This whole fireplace and wingback chair thing, like that is so not me. Yeah. Anyway, and they were just like sharing, it was just like, oh, so they've broadened the perspective on, again, it's not so vastly different, but it's another dimension, another layer, another perspective, a deepening, a broadening, like it just is more flavorful, from what we've gotten. And I find it quite interesting and amazing to watch this happen. And I've been hearing other people as well, Wendy, talk about their own personal experiences and how they're getting new information or information that's new to them, on a level that's deeper than what it would have been in previous times before all of this. So, and I like the fact that you shared with people that you really weren't sick. It was we recognize that this was a change. You know, you were meant to understand that it's not truly a sickness or an illness. You still get the physical symptoms of being sick or ill. A lot of people have been experiencing that, me included. You know, I had a bout for a whole week with a stomach virus, and I realized that some of it was a stomach virus and some of it was not. But the symptoms were still there, and the clearing, I think that people, maybe this might be a good way of looking at it. You were clearing stuff, as most of us do, at a deep level. We're not consciously aware of the clearing. And I was always kind of understood that we don't necessarily have to know everything about the clearing. We just simply have to be in a space to allow it to leave, to release it. The baggage or whatever you want to call it that we're carrying around, right? Mm-hmm. In order to allow the higher frequencies to come in. Oh, higherfrequencies.net.
Mm-hmm. I think, no, that's great. I think a lot of times when we're sick, you know, we have a tendency to go, what's wrong? Why have I created this? And God, that just sets us up in such a loop that just spirals us down. It sends us into a greater level of attachment. So if we can let go of that and just allow it to be whatever it is, whether you want to put the label of, you know, that it's a virus or, you know, it's a clearing, it's just allowing it to be what it is and putting yourself in the best possible frequency, that you're not attached to anything, you're not judging anything, and you're taking care and nourishing yourself. I think that's the best thing you can do to move through it.
Agreed. We have a question that came in from True Magic in the chat box, Wendy, wanting to know where are these new beings from? Let me answer that first because mine's short, and then let you answer it because, you know, I'm one of those that I ask a lot of questions. I don't always ask the right ones. So for me, it sometimes just does never occur to me to ask these beings where they're at. My first thing when I see them or sense them or communicate with them is, you know, who is this really that's chatting with me? In other words, are they aligned with me or are they being deceptive in some way? So I look at beings that step into my space, not as I don't ask the normal questions, which is who are you and where are you from? I get a sense impression of whether or not I even want to even open up dialogue to begin with. And then it's just, you know, I have a tendency just to get right to the point. So it didn't occur to me to ask them where they were from. Anyway, Wendy, what about you? Did you, these new beings that come in, have they shared with you where they're from?
Well, you know, it's kind of the same as with you in that I check the energy, and is this an energy that I want to connect with, and how does it feel? Because I think to ask that question and to get that answer, I'm, with my human brain, not really going to be able to get it. And so I have to feel through my heart, is this just what I want to align with? And so, like you, it doesn't always make sense to ask that question.
Yeah, it's more about, do you even want to share space, right?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, some of these beings, the keepers of frequency, they don't have physical form. So the way that we think of where do you come from, they're not coming from a planet, they're not coming from a star system, and they're in the higher realms. And so it's, you know, if I say they're 12th dimensional, what does that mean exactly? It's not that they align with anything. They are really working and maintaining the dimensional structure. That's part of what they do. So, you know, that's who they are. And then other beings have popped in. I had somebody pop in the other day, name of Francis. Francis was an angelic. I've never in 19 years consciously connected with Francis, but apparently he wanted to say hello and just let me know he was there. You know? And then I have my own guides that I work with, but I don't always work with my own angelics very often. Other beings, at least this lifetime and what I'm doing right now, other beings tend to step forward. So it's varied, but, you know, and I will say for the keepers of frequency, it definitely is an upgrade for me to connect with that. And it was actually quite difficult. I was working on the book, and their frequency, it was a stretch energetically, and it's been a long time since I felt really stretched by that. Because I know when I first started channeling, I couldn't last 5 minutes. I would fall asleep. I would check out. And then that built up, and today I can go for hours. But to work with keepers of frequency, it was a stretch again.
Fascinating, isn't it? Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was, it's just, like I said, it's all about the upgrade. And the information, while it's not, as I said, earth-shattering, it's not something that I didn't know. It's just really breaking it down and framing it in a slightly different way. And it's kind of like, oh, I hadn't really thought of it that way. I knew this in theory, but that really helps clarify it. And then
yes,
putting it into the day-to-day and becoming more conscious as I walk through my day.
It's an amazing trip when you can do that. And so, I want to kind of remind people the reason why we're having this conversation is because this really is about basics. I mean, we're talking about stepping into, your conscious self and becoming aware of your surroundings in a very physical, with your eyes kind of a thing, and getting beyond that and allowing those senses to work with the eyes and your physical space. Everything every place you're at has a story. It has some form of an energetic signature or signatures within it. Again, when you walk into a room, do you feel happy, sad? Did your mood change? There's all these little experiments that you can do for yourself, these little things that are just free of charge that you can do to stretch yourself, right? You can stretch yourself. My biggest thing is to learn how to have foods talk to you by going to the grocery store and picking up each item and how does it really feel to you. Simplest things. In your simplest everyday activities, you can do this. You can walk into your local drugstore, your local boutique, or your local grocery store, whatever it is. How do you feel when you're in there? Did it feel different than the last time you were in there? Become very cognizant of how the energetics are. There'll become times when you'll try to go through a door and it just won't let you. It's because the energetics aren't supporting you, and it's learning, and that's how we learn to listen to ourselves. So you pick up that cantaloupe and just want to drop it like a hot potato. It's your body in some way is responding to the energetics of you putting that into yourself to eat it, to consume it. It's asking you not to do that. It's very simple, and it's really not that difficult, these things that I'm saying. It does take practice. Yeah, and I think, you were a big one to practice. You were way more studious of a student than me.
I'm not so sure about that. But I think that's the truth. We forget. We just forget that we have these tools, or because things are so simple, we think, oh, no, that possibly can't work, or it can't be worthwhile. It has to be big and complex, and it really isn't. It's like really breaking it down to just observing, being present and observing. I think I love how you put that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm on it tonight. I don't know who's here with me, but I'm glad for them. They showed up a little before the show, and I was like, okay, well, we got them here. I don't know who it is, but we'll have fun tonight. And sure enough, we are. You see, it's just like, that's what I was talking about. It's like, every time I sit down to do a show, some different frequency or energetic will show up before the show, and I can already tell you what is going to be the flow for the show of that night. It's just going to be, okay, if I have somebody new on that I've never had on, I've never even spoken to, I'll go, well, let me see, how's this going to feel? Okay, well, this is going to be good. And so, I can direct my energetics towards that person in order to get that connection going so that we can truly have a dialogue, and this person can then begin to share whatever pieces of information. And it's no different than it is with you. When you come on, the P's have been with me for a while today. And of course they do pop in every now and then, which, by the way, I wanted to make mention of, we were talking about these, you were talking about the frequency keepers and some of the other beings that have popped in around you. And they do that because it's almost like with you working with the P's, this is my sense that I get, at least from my end of it, is when you're working with a group, as long as you've worked with them and you've become as communicative and as well as passing along the information that they share with you in a way that, has integrity and honesty and the best of your ability, it's almost like they then you begin allow things to come forward for you as an introduction. You've been introduced to these other beings, and they all just kind of sit around and wait until it's time for them to just, come and knock at your door.
Yeah.
That's the sense I get. It's like my group, the Elohim, is like, it's like, oh, hey, we brought you somebody new to talk to today,
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's like, it is definitely like somebody making the introduction. It's much easier to, if you're meeting somebody for the first time, to have a friend there who's making that introduction, and it's a nice buffer until you get comfortable, and then, your friend can't make it one day, and then it's just the two of you.
Yeah.
So definitely that's what it feels like. And, I mentioned I was working on this book, and, all of a sudden the frequency shifts, and with the P's it's not unusual because other beings will come in and out, and I will notice the shift in the frequency. I'm aware that it's the P's, and they're still the beings that are up at the front. It's not that it's somehow being distorted, but it's that they're bringing in other energies to infuse it in the work, because it will reach certain people, and people will then be able to tap into new frequencies because it's melded in there. But the keepers of frequency started coming in, and it was one of those things where they were trying to make the introduction while I was open, and while I was doing this new work with the new information, and they were giving me kind of the broad strokes with the new frequency, and then the P's would go over it in specific detail. But it was definitely making that introduction, and I was like, okay, this is a little intense. You got to back off just a bit because I can't do this just yet.
Not to this extent, right?
Yeah, I was like, I need just a little more time to to build up. And so you just need to dial it back just a little bit. If the P's could come forward just a bit and you could go back, it's like being a conductor with the music. The violins, those need to go down just a bit, and the percussion needs to come up. So
Yeah. Gotcha.
And we forget we have control over that when we work with these beings. If you're trying to work with your guides and you can't hear them, you can ask. You can ask for them to give you information in a stronger way, or if it is too intense, you can ask them to tone it down, because they don't know. They don't know what it's like to have a human body. You have to communicate with them.
It's an education for them as well.
Completely. And I love what you were saying about your fireside chat. I think that's another piece here, because we as humans think that they're just here helping us, but we're also helping them to learn and to grow. And I think that's in part why a lot more beings are starting to show up. It's kind of like, ooh, the show's getting really interesting now. And more of you can hear us. So yeah, now we can start really interacting with you. It's kind of like watching a child who's learning to walk, and when they start talking, that's when it gets really interesting, because then you can really start to communicate. And I think it's the same thing.
I'd have to agree with you on that. I think that, once you, like yourself, you allowed the P's to come in. Of course, when you're working with the P's, there's a lot in your group there in that collective. My Elohim is a little smaller of a collective than that, at least the ones that have worked with me directly in this particular nucleus of the group, right? And so with you, I can imagine the different kind of, I call them the personality strains, the little strains of different personalities within the collective. They all speak as a group, but there's every once in a while they kind of break off, and I can see them all individually going, well, I don't know. Should we tell her that? Well, I don't know. They like, hello, I can hear you. I'm still here. Yeah. And, so now I lost my train of thought because I was going down that road. Let me see if I can get it back here. But as you're working with them, and as these energetic of the collective comes in, it also expands, because we're not their only friends either, right? I mean, they're in a different space. And one of the things that I have been recently kind of reminded of is, like, We try to tell you people, we try to tell the people, whomever can actually hear them, right? That they communicate with, of kind of who we are and where we're coming from. It's like you're trying to explain who the the frequency keepers are, right? Where do they come from? Well, they don't come from, as you said, a specific space or place or even a time frame. They are in existence because the science behind their existence isn't something that we can really wrap our minds around. We're not there yet. We don't have first of all, we don't have the language, we don't have the understanding. Conceptually, you and I understand it, as well as many other who experience this, but there are no words or verbiage or any of that to really get to the accuracy of what it is that it is that you're kind of connected with. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I've really been working with that. Like, sometimes it's like you can feel the energy come in, but it takes a while to translate it because you don't have words and you have to find ways of building because you don't have a term that kind of encompasses it all. So you have to try to put together these little words to kind of describe the idea. So sometimes it can take a little while for me to find the language to express it.
And I think a big source of my frustration is trying to explain the concepts and trying to find something that is similar or it's sort of recognizable as that, but it still seems to take a lot of the wind out of the sails with the explanation. You're going, wow, that just sounds so inept when I say it.
Well, the best we can do with what we got. Because it's so rich, it's so layered. And, I think this is in part what many of us are struggling with right now. We have an idea of what we want to move towards, but, we're not seeing it. We don't know how to build it in the old way because we don't have the visual. We don't have a reference point for it. So when we try to talk about it, it just doesn't do it justice.
No, agreed. It does not. And I think the best thing is when you yourself are channeling, I think the best thing is that when people are involved with sitting and listening, they at least get to experience the energetics behind the messages. And I think that's where the deeper processes have always come in when you're channeling, Wendy, is that even though their mind may understand part of what, they're saying, there's a way deeper, maybe even an unconscious layer that's absorbing even more than what they think they are.
Absolutely.
And it's very powerful because it affects a change, and it's subtle enough that a lot of times people don't connect their own dots as to, well, gosh, I don't feel the same way as I did before. I wonder what that was about. And they may not have thought about, well, I was listening to Wendy channel the P's the other day, or, I was listening to this meditation tape, or, whatever the case may have been, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'd like people to really recognize that, things can just touch you in the most miraculous, magnanimous ways, and it's usually in the simplest of ways. And I think that's part of the basics as well, as just understanding that you are building yourself as long as you're open to building yourself. And rebuilding, I guess, is a better way of saying that, and kind of adding to the dimensional things. So back to the topic at hand, the basics. What else would you maybe attribute to some of your own experiences over the last few months, to some of the basics, as well as maybe how some of those basics have been enhanced, just through whatever it is that you have been working on in order to allow that to happen?
Well, definitely grounding is a big one. And they've talked a lot about grounding to me. And, that you have to start, that is the ultimate basic, because if you're not grounded and connected, then you can't really feel the frequencies. You can't identify them. And so I really had to go back to basics with that and practice, imagine, and times where I felt spacey or flighty or forgetful, just checking in. Am I connected? What's going on? And more than anything, am I present? Because if you're not present, you're not fully connected. And I was asking them about this earlier today, and they gave me a great visual. And, without going too much into the whole thing about time, when you incarnate and you're on this now moment, you can think of it like this really sharp laser-like spotlight. And when you start thinking about the past or the future, that really tight beam of light, which is your soul's essence coming into the body to actually physically create this incarnation in the physical body, when you think about the past or the future, you diffuse that light and try to put some of that energy onto other now moments that you're not standing on, that you're not experiencing. And so you literally diffuse your energy. You're not running full energy. And in essence, because you're not running full energy, you're not fully grounded and connected to the body. So, I really had to work a bit with that. I'm very empathic, and that was probably one of my greatest challenges, because I would feel things very deeply, and that didn't always make going out into the world a fun place to be. So I really have been working on it, and I just recently, last week, came through LAX, and, I think it was on the day of the Grand Cross, and it was a little intense.
Whoa.
And I witnessed some things, really people who were purging a lot of their anger and frustration, and it was insane watching it. I just thought, I can't believe I just witnessed that. But I had been doing so much work grounding that I didn't feel disturbed by it, which, 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago, definitely would have been the case. Going through an airport was like my worst nightmare. So, I can definitely see the benefits in my own life of doing something that's just really, really simple. And, just getting out in nature and quiet will help. And, I live in LA, and it's like one giant tornado. It's a vortex of energy that always feels like it's moving and chaotic. So, it's really important for me here, and I notice it when I'm away, to make sure I come back and really ground. And then also being in the flow. That's another thing. Being very conscious of what I'm doing out of obligation and what I'm doing out of joy and excitement. And I had an idea of what I needed to get done and when I needed to get it done in order to stay on schedule and with commitments that I've made. And so I was very excited about doing another project, and I had all these creative ideas, and I stopped doing that to do this other thing that I felt like needed to be done because I'd agreed to do it. And when I did that, all of my energy just stopped. And even though the project that I was working on was something that I wanted to do, it began feeling like an obligation. And it took me a little while to recognize it. And I was like, all right, I just have to stop. I have to go back to doing things that excite me. I have to either change how I'm thinking about this, which I was able to do, but I still recognized that that wasn't enough. I needed to go back to the first thing that I was doing, where I had all that creative energy and those ideas. But my mind had it set that this is what I was supposed to do instead of just going with the flow. And
what a valuable story that you just shared with everyone there, Wendy. I'm not sure if people really understood it, so I'd like to pull it apart a little bit for
Sure.
them. You were talking about what gives you joy and happiness, which is, whatever you call that for yourself. I mean, for some people, it's building Legos, whatever the case may be. For other people, it may be actually going to their job every day. I mean, it does bring them joy and happiness. And then that which you committed to that, now all of a sudden you feel very tired and you don't want to do it, et cetera, and so forth, and there's no joy or happiness in it. And it's learning how to balance those, your commitments versus your joy and happiness. And I think that's probably the biggest piece here for many people, is how to harmonize within your own personal life that which brings you joy and happiness along with that which you need to do, and to not get caught in any one thing for too very long, so that you're not always in your joy and happiness, to honor those commitments that may not bring you as much joy and happiness, and that you're not resenting those times that you're away from being your creative self or whatever it is, because you don't make those commitments on such a long term that you lose your enthusiasm, you lose your drive, you lose your, your lightheartedness, the joy. One thing gives you something else to look forward to.
Yeah. And recharges you and opens you back up and gives you a fresh way to perceive.
Yeah, for sure. And, the commitment thing, my thing is working when I was working in regular corporate USA. I can't remember ever really feeling joy or happiness, working for somebody else. I always found their business practices to be unsavory, to be unfair, to be unjust. That's the humanitarian and the Aquarian side of me. Not loving that, and not being able to go home and finding an outlet to balance that in any way or to harmonize that in my younger days. And I look back and I think, I should have taken up a different hobbies or something different. The only thing that ever brought me a great deal of that was in the spring and summer when I was able to plant gardens and to harvest and cultivate them and flowers and to grow flowers and things. That was really the only, I looked forward to coming home at night and working in my garden. That was just lovely. But, it didn't last all year. I don't live in LA. I can't grow a garden, year round. Or even in California for that matter. So, I think it's a really good thing for people to maybe just sit back now and to reevaluate the space that they're in and see if there's a place where they may be not as balanced, or certainly not as happy, and realize that it's an easy cure for a lot of depression that people carry around and unhappiness, is because they're not giving themselves permission for that joy and creative flow.
Yeah.
And so that was a great story, especially with the LAX thing. Yeah, that was. Yeah, I understand that.
And I think also we get this idea of the order that we're supposed to do things in, and in the timing, and I think that's something that's really important to let go of. And I've certainly seen that in my own life, and knowing that, God, it will show up when it's the right time, and go back to doing what brings me joy in this moment. And the guys kept trying to tell me that, I can be a little stubborn.
No. You certainly can't be like the rest of us.
It's a blessing and it's a curse.
It is. It is both. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not quite as good.
Yeah.
For sure, sweetie.
And when
wow.
I will say one other thing, and I will say that I have noticed that it's small tweaks that make big differences right now. That, even though I've had an awareness of these things in my life and I do practice them, I notice that it really is sometimes the very small, subtle things that I do that make a big, big difference.
Yes, and I agree. And I think it's when we, it kind of gets back to that whole thing of, us humans we still have a tendency to look for the big bang, the big flower, the big bang, the big boom, whatever it is. And it really is the subtle things that are the best things. And, I think I've told this story a million times about, I was running out my door one day and the Elohim came in and they said, okay, stop. And I mean, they yelled in my ear to make me stop. And I was like in the middle of my sidewalk, right? And I'm like, my first thought was, complete panic almost struck me. And I was like, what am I doing? Okay, see that over there? And I had some rose bushes. And I said, yes, this is stop and smell the roses. And I was like, I laughed and laughed and laughed. I was like, are you kidding me? No, really, do that. And so, I went over there and I took a deep breath and I just released and I said, okay, so if I have to stop and smell the roses, I'm really going to stop and smell the roses. So I stopped and smelled the roses and I began to look at it. And I'm going to tell you what, my whole day changed after that.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when I would go in and out of the house, the first thing that I would do is just stop and look at the roses and I would admire them. I would look at the other flowers and other plants and stuff that I had planted. And I did. I just stopped and just took it all in. It only takes us a few seconds. It's not like I stood there for hours. And it was like, that was just like a huge turning point for me. Yeah. I was like, it really is the small things. You don't need those big booms and the big this and the big that. These are the things, these moments are the moments in time, right here, right now. Those little ones.
Just bringing it back to the present.
That's right. That's right. I call them the little miracles in our life, right? We have a lot of them. So, my dear, what else would you like to chat about? I know that the peas are knocking at your door there.
Well, I'm either happy to take questions from people, or we can bring the peas in and take questions from people. So,
well, let me do this. Let me go ahead and let me get that the number for. We might try to take some call-ins here after the top of the hour. After we come back, if we have a commercial break. Now, we haven't had any, so I don't know. Sometimes we get a commercial break at the top of the hour, Wendy, and sometimes we don't. So, again, just go with the flow, right? If we don't get one, we just keep talking. But Wendy, Wendy and I will be taking phone calls. When I say I will be introducing the caller to Wendy. And the call-in number for tonight is 702-879. Dave, I think you got your mic open. 4770. So it's 702-879-4770. And that's the call-in number for after the top of the hour. But we do have a question that has come in from, Sia's. Sometime during the show, can you talk about the major alignments that happen in April, its impact on us Earthlings? Okay, so that would be a question for the peas. We do have a question for the peas already. So, Wendy, if you want to talk about it from your perspective before you bring the peas in, that's fine. And then we'll make sure we ask that question of the peas when they come in.
I think maybe we'll leave that one for the peas.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. So, you guys, if you have questions, you can also write to us in the chat rooms. You can get to those chat rooms at freedomslips.com. That's Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You can also write at wolfspiritradio.com and journeyswithrebecca.com. We've got monitors in those rooms, and we'd be happy to answer. Wendy will, or the peas will. Answer any questions that you guys might have tonight. We'll be taking call-ins after the top of the hour. One of the things that I'd like for you maybe to chat about a little bit, too, Wendy, before you bring in the peas, is there seems to be a huge resurgence. It's never really gone away, but a huge resurgence, and I'm going to say over the past year, of galactic information. There seems to be more and more evidence being provided to to the general populace, if you want to put it that way. That obviously we've always been visited. We are being visited. Dave, your mic is open again. That we've been visited. We have been visited. We are being visited, whatever the case may be. There's also been a huge resurgence in people talking about the telepathic communication, such as you have with the peas, I have with Elohim. Many people have their own. There's a lot of people who are listening that actually have their own internal dialogue or telepathic dialoguing with extraterrestrials, star people, whatever you wish to say. What's your take on all of that?
I think a lot of it has to do with timing. When you ask about more galactic history and more information coming forward, I think it's just time. And I compare the peas already. I think they have some things they want to share later. But for myself, I know it's a big piece for me. Not only do I have the telepathic experience, I've also had physical experiences. And I don't generally talk about those a lot because I'm still processing through some of that. For me, while I have an awareness of my contract, I also, as a human, am processing some of the trauma. I don't hold anger or frustration or anything like that. It's just trauma that's been trapped in my body. And more I've been working to integrate that and gain access to more information. And also the guides have been... Oh, we got some ringing going on.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening here. We got somebody's phone is ringing in our background, Dave.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message.
There we go.
Okay.
So
You had a caller from the 216 area.
Okay, well they didn't, it shouldn't be ringing, it should just have went through.
I missed it because I was trying to breathe.
Oh, okay. It's all good, babe. Go ahead, Wendy.
So I think part of it is just the timing, and they're giving me more information about galactic history and going deeper, because in some ways I think prior to this point, for many of us, it just would have been a distraction. And it would have kept us focused on other lifetimes, and really this is a lifetime that we needed to anchor. We needed to identify with, because this is, the most important lifetime. This is the one which our focus is in. So I do think that there's more information that is coming in, more and more information about different species, different star systems, more than just the major players that we're used to hearing about, because we're starting to open up and we're ready for that. It won't be a complete shock to our system. And as somebody who, God knows how many beings that I've actually channeled, but a couple of years ago, I had a physical experience and I wasn't expecting it. And I was shocked how much fear I still had in my body. I mean, it's one thing to have it in theory. It's another to have that being standing right beside you and in a very conscious way. So, there's still more fear to process through. And I think we've been doing enough work that they can start showing up more and more. And I'll be curious to see what unfolds. And maybe we can ask the P's about this tonight, because I haven't asked for a while. Originally, at the end of last year, they had mentioned that there may be some more things coming out summertime about disclosure and more physical documents. It probably won't be in spoken word, but they were saying that it would probably be physical documents that would come out and make its way out. It probably wouldn't be really dramatic. It'd kind of be subtle, but we would find them.
Well, that's pretty interesting, because I have actually gotten, I haven't put it on paper, but for the past about month, I've been given information about my new book that I'm writing, and it is about the history. It's very interesting stuff, seriously, about just the formation of this planet, what this planet really is, how did it get here, how did we get here, who are some of the players, and again, talking about beings that I know nothing about. I mean, it gets real interesting, and I have been given a process in which I'm supposed to do this, and I'm hoping within the next 30 days that I can actually begin sitting down and writing it, and it should go actually quite quickly. When I'm saying quickly, probably only take me a few months, maybe 6 months or so, to get it completed. So right along similar lines, not identical obviously, but similar lines, and then some. And I think you're right about, many people are pretty focused on, the history and everything. And I think the history is important at this point only because we're ready to release that and not hang on to it.
Yeah.
It simply just gives us a better understanding of who we are, how we got here, what our contracts are, and what our real true missions are here to be, and why we've chosen to be here.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of all rolls into that. And as opposed to just, focusing on the negative aspect. And you're right. I thought about what you just said about having fear when you said, in the physicality, when I first started channeling, it was not the Elohim that was trying to come through. I have no idea who they were. I never did really learn, in my first few attempts at channeling. And, I can tell you I fought it. I fought it a lot because it felt foreign. It felt heavy. It felt bigger than life itself. It was one of the most extreme uncomfortable feelings I ever had. And I have no idea who or what they were, or it, or him, or her, or whatever. But I'm not, and I realize now that it was just fear that did not allow me to bring forth that presence. It was a fear.
Hey,
Now, why I never recognized it after all these years, I don't know until you said that, and it was just like, click, oh, there's that answer.
I mean, some of these beings are really lovely.
Oh,
but
yes.
when you're looking at a species that looks nothing like you, you know, that does not conform to my mental idea as a typical human being of what reality is supposed to be like, that we're alone in the universe. And so the mind has a hard time, even as open as I am in my experiences. And part of the fear was some of the trauma that I needed to process from some of my previous encounters. And again, that was just from the ego level, safety, security, forgetting that I was connected to these beings. You know, the guys, they have a great analogy, and it would be like being thrown a surprise party, and you walk in the door and everybody screams surprise, and you're startled because for a moment you don't remember that these are your friends. And that's kind of what the experience was like. And there's something, the other part that, you mentioned with history, and part of the reason why I think it's difficult for us to access is because we're experiencing this perception of linear time. We're looking for one simple timeline of information and one absolute truth, and it just doesn't exist that way.
It doesn't.
So
it's so convoluted.
It is, and so until you can open your mind to that, you just can't have the history. You just can't have it.
You know, here's what the Elohim did for me a while back. This is fun. A few months ago. Well, quite a few months ago now. I was looking, like you said, looking for a timeline, a specific piece of information, right? And I was following this timeline. And so the Elohim came forward, and it was like they turned me around and allowed me to look at it from how they would see it, right? Here, this is how we see it. And, like literally they turned me around and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then all of a sudden I was standing in front of somebody else and they were going, but wait, this is how we see it. Mm. And oh, wait. And so I was passed down this line. Like, okay, I get it.
360 degrees later.
Yeah, I get it, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, after the fourth or fifth one, I was like, okay, really understood. And to really, my mind knew that, but until I had that experience, I'm like, okay, so there's truth in almost everybody's story, no matter what the story is, because it comes from their unique perspective. And even though you have the collective, if you have an individual within that collective and you have 25 individuals or 100 individuals, you're going to get a slight variant from each of those individuals within the collective. There may be an overall consensus of agreement, but the details are going to be slightly different on how they viewed it, even if they were all there at the original point of whatever the event was that took place. It's quite amazing.
That's why, sometimes we have hesitation about doing something because we think, oh, it's been done, or, and it's just, it is that thing that you have something unique because of your perspective to contribute. And that's why it's so fascinating to me. It's, well, which way do you want to view it? How do you want to formulate it to create your story or your base or your experience of reality?
Okay, let's see here. I think we have a question. Let me see who this question is for, whether it's for you or for the P's. Wendy, give me a second. Okay, now that the quarantine is off, more ETs have access to us. Perhaps there will be more episodes of ETs connecting with us when we're not high enough vibration. This is what I heard was the case of the missing plane.
I think I might have missed something there.
Yeah, me too. I'm not reading it correctly or something. Perhaps there will be more episodes of ETs connecting with us. And I think they might have meant when we are high enough vibration, because if you're not, then you're not going to be able to perceive them or connect with them. And what I'm understanding that they're saying here is that this is what I heard was the case of the missing plane. The reason why some people could see it and some people could not is because their vibration frequency was different. That missing MH370 plane that they're still searching for after all these weeks, that had the 20 scientists on there. Did you hear about that?
I did. And the piece have, they've shared their perspective with me. So, again, it's one of those things which is interesting. How do you need to take the story in order for you to insert it into your life? Do you need to look at it as a conspiracy? Do you need to look at it as a tragedy? Do you, how do you want to shape it? How do you want to frame it? And how are you using it as a mirror for what's going on in your own life?
For me, it's a mystery. So what does it tell you about mine? Oh my. Anyway, well, yeah, there's a lot of different, they've actually shown me about 4 or 5 different things. And again, it goes back to that story I was just telling you from here's somebody's perspective, here's another one, slightly altered. Will the truth ever come out? I don't know. It depends on whose truth you want to listen to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the one thing that I can say to that, though, is that I do hope that all those people that were on board are safe and well cared for wherever they're at. That's what I would hope for. And I know their families and loved ones miss them. So that's the not so good portion of that, in my opinion, is those that they leave behind. But that was it. Okay. Let's see. Let me go with one more question, and then we're going to bring the Elohim in. And let's see. All right, the Elohim. I don't know why I said that. That's because they're standing here. The P's in. She's going, wait a minute, I thought this was my show.
I was excited. I wanted to hear what the Elohim had to say.
I don't know. They're crazy. In March, I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw what looked like a shadow of an alien. I got scared and said no and covered with my blanket and went back to sleep. Then 2 weeks later, I heard 2470. Was this my imagination?
I think I missed something there too. 2470.
I'm wondering if that was the plane number.
Okay. Well, again, I think that might be a question for the P's.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then we'll leave all of that, and we obviously did not get a break. So do you need to step away for a moment before we go forward?
I think I'm actually okay.
All right. Well, are you ready to bring in the P's? Because I'll keep the Elohim with me.
So I always like just to tell people what the P's are like, because I get asked a million times about the dialect. And the P's actually work with tone and sound, which is why the dialect is different than my own. It's not any one particular dialect. It's just tones and sounds that resonate at the cellular level. And, we were talking earlier about the frequency that comes in. And, they've often said to me, you could read the phone book and it won't matter, or we could read the phone book to you and it wouldn't matter. It's the frequencies that you're getting that are so important. So, as you go tonight, just take the bits and pieces that resonate with you. If it doesn't resonate, leave it. And know that you're getting exactly what you need. And it may be a download that you're getting that you will unpack and open and activate later. So it'll take me just a second to bring them in.
Okay, very good.
See where we go.
All right, Wendy, we'll see you on the other side, honey.
Yes, hello, dears. This is the Ninth Dimensional Pleiadian Collective, and it is a pleasure and an honor to have the opportunity to connect with you all. So it is a very full house, many beings showing up, and we will talk about that in just a moment. But, you have boundless support. And if there's one thing that all of these guides and celestial friends who are showing up wish to impart,
It is that you are, in fact, very loved, very cared for, very supported. And although there are times in which you are unable to hear and connect with us, we are still able to communicate, and there is part of you that gets the information. Even if the mind doesn't quite get it, the rest of you, the heart of you, gets it and is reminded of your connection. Because at the core, playing in the illusion of the 3D game is the illusion of separation. And that's where you have the deepest, what we will call wound. And to know that you're supported and to feel that support, even if the mind doesn't get it, and you can remember being in physicality and having that experience, that puts most of you at ease, just to have that reminder. So we will talk here briefly about some of the other beings who are showing up, and then we're going to go ahead and start taking some of your questions. So yes, as you increase your frequency, you are going to start experiencing more and more of these beings. And some of them will be your part of your soul family. Some of them will be beings with whom you have incarnated in various forms, in various lifetimes together. And they may appear literally in front of you, or they may be working with you in dream time to help you to gain another perspective on perhaps one of the issues that you're currently working on. So let's say you lived on a planet in which the society was heavily scientifically based, and you found anything that was quote-unquote spiritual to be a waste of time because you were only interested in facts, you weren't interested in emotion. So in this lifetime, you may be playing out the same issue. You may be really centered on what you can prove and not trusting what you feel at the emotional level or what you feel intuitively as you access your sense of claircognizance. And so they will come to you and remind you of what these frequencies were, the many ways that you tried to integrate, or ways that you tried and didn't work, or ways that you tried and you were able to integrate perhaps just to a shallow level. You weren't able to go very deep with that level of integration, because when you all clear and integrate, it is usually done in levels and layers, because especially in 3D, you get very locked into the game, and this pattern is repeated over and over and over and over and over again. So the depth that goes to is quite extensive. And so these beings are working with you in your dream time, and you're sharing your perspective. We do want to say one other thing here, because we see a few people a bit confused. What's integration? What does that really mean? It means letting go of judgment, letting go of any attachment to one extreme of polarity, that something is right, that something is wrong, that it's good, it's bad, it's light, it's dark. In order to enter into 3D reality, you have to enter into an extreme of polarity. And on this planet, the extremes of polarity are miles and miles apart. And as you go up in dimensional structure, those extremes of polarity are far closer together. So where you are really steeped in this idea of polarity, and you will choose one or the other. And what you're seeing is you're choosing one side of a coin, and what you're failing to see is that it's a whole coin. It's both light and dark. It's both head and tail. And you can't just take the tail part of the coin and leave the head part. It's part of the whole. You're just choosing to look at it from a particular polarity or from a particular side. So as you go through this process of integration, it's remembering the whole coin. It's remembering that there isn't just a right or the wrong. Really, it's about the totality of the experience, not just one end of the polarity that you're looking at. So this is really what you're doing here. You're going through this integration process of releasing your judgment and acknowledging that it's just a vibrational selection. It's not right, it's not wrong, it just is. And as you do that, you're able to elevate your frequency. And we understand this in all other dimensions. We will choose to access that information or perspective at to varying degrees, depending on which dimension, 5D and up, that we're in, and what game we're playing. So we've gone off on a bit of a tangent. We did want to continue talking about some of these beings who are showing up, and you are teaching them really what it's like to have compassion. Because as you enter into some of these deep experiences of the negative end of the spectrum, you have a lot more compassion for people who are there than beings who know that they create their own reality, and if you don't like it, change it. That's kind of the attitude. So to destroy a planet, while it wasn't great, many of the beings didn't really perceive it as being horrible either. In the fifth dimension, they said, oh, well, that's how it played out, and that soul group will go off and do something else. So by going down and having some of those fifth dimensional beings entering into third dimensional game, and in the extreme that you're in, you really get a sense of the value of every experience and honoring the difficulty with which it is often experienced to release judgment. So your history is becoming more and more available to you as you open up your awareness and your mind to the multidimensional perspective. And we thought it was put quite eloquently earlier about being turned to look at things in multiple directions, because that is in essence what it is really like. And when the mind gets locked into one idea, what happens when you get another perspective is that you go to war inside of the mind to say, well, which is right? And that sends you spiraling down into doubt about your own intuition and about what's right, what's wrong, what do you believe, what do you not believe. And so until you are able to raise your consciousness to that level to know that there are multiple perspectives of the truth, then it's very difficult for you to access your history, because you'll get locked into a story and you'll get locked into the blame game. And, you know, it's all about perspective. So we'll go ahead and take some other questions, and we think there might have been one or two asked before, and we're happy to take those as well.
Well, good evening, Mrs. P. As always, it's such a delight to have you here, speaking through Wendy and joining us tonight. Thank you so much. It's always fun to have you around.
It's our pleasure.
So let's talk about the first question, Mrs. P, that came in, about the quarantine is off and the ETs have more access to us. Perhaps there will be more episodes of ET connecting with us when we're high enough vibration. And this is what they heard in regards also to the idea of the missing plane. So how you would like to approach that, please do.
Well, we would offer you a slightly different way of perceiving the quarantine. It's not so much that ETs or celestial beings will have greater access to you. It also means that you have access to them, because oftentimes when you hear that they're going to have greater access to you, that sets you off into victim consciousness. Well, I don't know they're there. What's going to happen? So we just want to open you up to know that it's not just that they're able to interact more with you. You are also better able and capable of interacting with them. Now, when we look at your frequency, when we follow the thread, some of what you were getting is to show you the multidimensional perspective. We would say, your guides are telling us that it's the multiple dimensional perspective that's part of why you were given that number. To remind you, it's which version is your truth. Which one do you want to align with? Because especially around this particular incident, there are many, many versions of the truth. And history for humans, that's something you have to go inside to get, because your history has been so manipulated. There have been so many versions of the story, and they've been co-opted and reframed to suit different purposes, that really you're not going to feel satisfied with any answer you get, even the one that we could give you, and we will give you one. But until you go inside and get an answer that feels accurate for you, you just aren't going to be satisfied. From our perspective, there was manipulation of energy. So there was cloaking technology that was used. It has existed, and it's not the first time that it's been used on your planet. It was used back in in the events of 9/11, where they were able to cloak technology, and it was for resources, some of them human, some of them physical. And there are some who know exactly what happened to that plane, but it's not going to be discussed because that would show you, some of the games that are being played. Now, having said that, what we would say is that you need to take note of how you feel about what we said. Are you triggered in any way? Are you finding yourself activated around the idea of manipulation? Are you angry because you feel that the truth has been withheld from you? We have great respect and empathy for those who are connected to the passengers on that flight. We will also say that all of the beings on that flight, as a gift to humanity, participated to be a reflection, to help humanity to look at where it is keeping itself separate from source, separate from each other, and there are lots of ways you could say that, keeping in fear. How are your fears getting activated? And these beings have graciously agreed to be the mirror that you could use so that you could process more fear. So we hope that answers the question.
Beautiful. Very well said. Thank you, Mrs. P. Oh, okay. All right. The next question comes from, I'm thinking it's pronounced Omara. I'm not sure. Okay. In March, I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw what looked like the shadow of an alien. I got scared and said no, and then I covered my self up with my blanket and went to sleep. Then 2 weeks later, I heard 2470. It was just the numbers, and they were 2470, very clear, and the voice was very loud and clear. So this question on the 2470, Mrs. P, I misspoke it and said maybe it was about the plane, but the 2 weeks later, it was, they heard the number 2470, and they want to know, was all of this their imagination?
No, it was not. So, and that's the hard thing for you all to do. It's to really pay attention to how things feel. Because in the moment when you experience something, it's very real, it's very valid. And then you all go back to the mind and go into doubt and want to pull it apart. So what we would say is, if something comes in, accept it that way. And then you can check in, is it still my truth now? Is it still my truth a day later? But we would say don't necessarily throw it out and dismiss it. All right? Check in. But we would say it was a real occurrence and it was something that you experienced. And to even put it in a very base level, if it was simply your imagination, you're waking up from sleep, you are still trying to get information to yourself from the subconscious, we would say it was not your subconscious in this case, but, pay attention. We would also say this about dreams. If you are one who can't necessarily recall all of your dreams or details, pay attention to how you feel when you wake up. Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling restless? Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling excited? Because that will give you a good indicator of what you are processing at the subconscious level through the night. Because that's where you're trying to work out some of your anxieties and bring information up to the conscious level.
Very good. Yeah, I like that a lot. Okay, well, we've got a few more that came in. I'm just going to keep rolling at them if that's okay.
Yes.
All right. What do the ethereal bodies look like immediately upon death, physical death?
Well, the easiest way we could say it for you would be light. It's just light. It's particles, light particles.
Okay. And that's from Hippo. So thank you, Hippo. And this next one is from Jen. I have a scar on my chest. I was awake and I was outside those 3 nights in May 19th, 20th, 21st, 1999, the day after my graduation. I feel it was the cat people who knew my energy drop. I wonder what happened when my energy dropped those 3 nights. Are you understanding the question?
Well, there's some victimization going on there. It's almost like your frequency drops and what happened. So we would say be conscious of that. When we look at, there are often many beings around. All right, so when we look at your records, we're seeing that there are often many different beings that are around. Sometimes you will create things in the physical body which don't necessarily happen, and we'll explain what we mean by this in just a moment. But sometimes you may have a scratch or a scar or an injury where you didn't have the actual physical experience of it, as you experience things from a 3D level. So in other words, you didn't cut yourself, but there you have a cut. Sometimes this is done just simply through energetics and through consciousness to get your own attention. You don't actually have to have the physical experience. And this is one of the things that you all are working with as you begin to understand that your reality is created through the frequencies that you pulse out. It's not about the state of doing, it's about the state of being. So when you immediately manifest and you are pulsing out frequency, you can imagine a scar on your arm and it will immediately appear there. You kind of get the idea when you think about healing that you can miraculously heal the body, but you can also create that deformity, or you can create that injury the same way, and it's pulsed through frequency. So what we also see for you is that you've done a few things energetically throughout your life to get your own attention, to get you to stop and to literally pay attention in the moment and to start asking some questions. So even if the questions you're asking, the assumptions that you make aren't exactly how things played out in your 3D version of reality, it's still serving you because it is getting you to open your awareness and getting you to open your mind. And that's in part what we would say. Yes, there is feline energy that is around, some Syrian energy that's around. If you want to connect more and more with that energy, you can. And there are also some lifetimes in Egypt in which you worked with felines. We're not talking about physical cats as you have them on this planet today. We're talking about the bipeds that have feline features that were in the Sirius star system. And you as a human connected with them. So part of your mixing of the tale, as it were, or mixing of the story happens because you're not able to piece everything together quite in the overarching way that it existed, but you're putting it together in the most palatable way that you can at the moment so that you can function and process with that bit of information. It's a very long-winded answer.
No, it was perfect. It was lovely. Thank you so much. Really. I think they needed to hear all of that. Really. Okay, this next one is from Sun. They want to know from you, Mrs. P, if you believe that the situation in Ukraine can be resolved peacefully.
Well, it certainly is our hope, yes. We really hope so, and it is always a potential. It is absolutely always a potential. It's just how aligned are you going to be with it. When we look right now, what has the strongest probability are some smaller disputes. It doesn't have to be loss of life. And things can be resolved. There are two things we would say. One, again, look at the personal level and see where you're playing out that dynamic yourself. All right, so what's going on there? What are the issues? How do you feel triggered about it? And as you start to integrate and clear within yourself, you then become the living example. So those people who are encountering that skirmish, that they are able to learn from you as you've already walked through it. We always say it's a bit like baking a cake. If you don't know how to bake a cake or where to start or what the ingredients are or what the measurements are, it's not a very tasty cake. And it may not bake at all. But if somebody gives you a recipe, then you can turn out a beautiful, delicious cake. And this is basically what you're doing, is as you deal with your own issues, you put that into the holographic record, and those beings have access. Now, the second thing we would say to you is that it is vital that you perceive the potential that there need not be any bloodshed as being a possibility and as a reality. As you hold that, it makes it easier for others then again to plug into that energy. So as you do both of those things, you can help to resolve the issue in a less dramatic way, that you don't need all of that because you're doing your part energetically to add that to the collective consciousness, and then you're sending out the highest possible outcome, which is peace and connection. So that would be our recommendation there.
Thank you very much for that, Mrs. P. Now, I have a couple of questions here for you. April was quite a astounding month energetically. More specifically, I'm talking astrologically. Obviously, not only for this planet, but the entire solar system and beyond. Would you care to speak on, I know Wendy and I spoke a little bit about that, but maybe you could enhance on that a little bit for the audience as to what are the indicators that happened during the month of April for us, and what the portends are, and how people can take a positive advantage of what did transpire.
Well, you're really going to be feeling the effects of April until you get to the summer solstice, at least in the northern hemisphere. And once you get there, then there's a whole new set of programs and things that you get to access. But, you get to pull apart what happened in April. And April was all about accessing fear, getting to the stuff that was deeply rooted with two eclipses, what is seen and what is unseen, all right? So you've got the new moon and the full moon, what can be seen and what is unseen. And it really was a time that when you're feeling under pressure, that's when your stuff comes up, all right? So when you've got a grand cross, everything is square, you really feel that pressure. Also, a lot of you, when you're feeling like you're being put into a box, which in some ways that's what this planetary structure created, that you also will feel all of that fear and that pressure coming up. So some of you were able to process quite a bit through the month as you were going on. Others of you are going to take a bit longer and continue to go and work through a lot of those fears. We would say take advantage of this celestial energy. Use it while it's available. So don't just stuff the feelings back down. If you're feeling upset, look at it. What is upsetting to you? Because we guarantee you anything that you're upset with another person about, you're upset with yourself about, because you're really not upset with the other person. And let us give you an example. You may be really upset with someone because you felt like because they weren't available, all right? That they didn't respond to you or give you the emotional nourishment that you were looking for. You felt they were really selfish. And so you may be really upset with them. But it's really you being upset with you because you didn't take care of your own needs. You were looking for someone else to give you that energy, to give you that approval instead of giving yourself the approval, the nourishment, and the attention that you needed. So if you're conscious of that, what you can then do is start paying attention and nourishing yourself. What are my needs? What am I doing out of obligation? Either I need to say no, or I need to change how I see what I'm doing. I need to change that perspective. And if you can do this in the moment, then it's going to be much easier as you go. From here on out, it's going to be pretty intense. And this is just to get you to pay attention. Because here's the thing, as you get higher in frequency, many of you will say, well, gosh, it's harder now. Well, it's not so much harder, it's that you aren't as numb. So you've increased your sensitivity level. So something that may be much smaller on the scale feels monumental where 10 years ago, or even 2 years ago, or 2 months ago, what was monumental in its intensity, you couldn't feel because you were numbed out. So as you release all of these judgments, you become highly sensitive. And so even the slightest thing can really pluck your string, so to speak. So use it and know that if you address it in the now, it's just going to be easier so that you don't have to create drama to get your attention later on.
Okay, so then I have a follow-up question to what you just stated. And I know that Wendy has similar kind of things going on too. It seems like I have become more and more ultra sensitive to energy shifts, to whatever else is going on with people. A lot more information coming through. Dave, your speakers are open again. There's a whole bunch more sensitivity that seems to be arriving at my doorstep, and try obviously to keep myself in a good space. Some days obviously are better than others, but because of this heightened sensitivity and heightened information that comes in as well, I mean, it just like is a big bombardment all the time. What are some of your suggestions? I don't want, obviously, I myself don't want all of this to go away. I would just like to find a better way of, I don't know, a better way of, I guess, I don't even know what word I want to use here, Mrs. P. I don't want it to go away, but I certainly, it certainly becomes quite a focal point because it's not like you can dismiss it. You have to look at it, and it's not necessarily my own stuff. It's just, it's like I can tell when there's a storm coming or the weather has shifted. It's just like energy on any level, all levels, no matter what I'm talking about, seems to, I seem to be able to feel it. So I don't know if you have anything that you can say to that at all. I don't even know what my question is, really. Well, it's just...
We've got a lot to say to that, and okay. We do understand the question. So we would say, a lot of this has to do not so much as reading the frequency, but it's identifying with it. And if you're coming from that whole coin space, all right, if you're coming from the whole space that everything is neutral, then it's not a problem to read that energy. It's just the same as reading a book. It's not going to have much charge in any sort of direction for you. Because in that state of neutrality, in that state of total acceptance, you are able to run full source energy. Now, when you start identifying with some of those frequencies, because you've still got things running in the field, you've still got issues of separation, of boundaries, or... there is some level of judgment or resistance. When you encounter some of these frequencies, as you're reading or capturing the frequencies around you, there is some level of identification that's going on. It will tweak the frequency in you that says, "Oh, this doesn't feel good. I know what I know what this feels like. This means that there's going to be a big upheaval, and people are going to be crazy, and then I'm not going to want to be out." It can trigger that cascade effect, and it may be a ways down the line as you look at it until you get to the crux of it, and what the fear is, and what string is really being plucked. So we would say the best thing that you can do for yourself is just simply to stop and ground, to connect with the body, to connect with the earth, to connect with the heavens. Because when you do that, you reset your center. And you might have to do it several dozen times throughout the day, especially when you're in a very intense period, and especially when other people around you are really feeling it and all this stuff is coming up, that it will become easier and easier for you to walk amidst the chaos. We always give the affirmation, I stand in peace in the midst of chaos, because that is what you will do. You will be the beacon of light as you learn to hold your frequency and not identify with one of the polarities that somebody is experiencing. And we mean the polarity of both positive and negative. Because many of you forget or you don't recognize that you also judge the positive. So, you all want to end up towards the positive, and that does elevate your frequency, but at some point in the game, you're also going to have to let go of your attachment to the positive and just know that it's fine. It is the same as the negative. It is part of that same coin. And it's just a step that we know that you all go through, but you do hold attachment and judgment to both the positive and to the negative. And sometimes, when you think of judgment, you think of it as a negative, but judgment just means that you have made a decision about it. And the positive is the best, all right? You've chosen, a polarity. You've made a judgment. So if you can ground and center yourself, that's going to help you to feel far more functional. And it's a learning process. It is practice, 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 and moment to moment to moment. Because as you elevate your frequency, you're creating more immediately, and you're becoming more sensitive to those slight variations in frequency, so that you can be really clear about what you're immediately manifesting.
Okay. I think the answer in there for me is that I tried to sit and take a deep breath and refocus. I'm just not doing it often enough on some of those days when it's quite intense. I mean, it's like, literally I can turn my head sideways and it's just like a whole bombardment of energy, and it's just understanding that it's there. There's nothing positive or negative for me about it. It's just that it's just is an onslaught. It just is there. It's like the sensitivity, is extremely heightened. So, and the information comes in. I call it things stepping into my field. Pieces of information about people will float in, and just shows up. And they seem to run hand in hand, by the way. The onslaught of sensitivity with an onslaught sounded negative. I don't mean it that way. It's just a huge rush wave. Sometimes that wave will last for several days. And it just is extremely strong. So I think, the information is just to, like you said, is to ground and just to, be more cognizant of making that connection of, the heavens to the earth and putting myself in the middle of that. So, I much appreciate that.
Yeah, we'll say one other thing. It would be a bit like hearing a loud noise outside that was really irritating. Really, really loud. If you can ground and connect yourself and just allow, it fades into the background. You don't notice it. It's not annoying any longer because it becomes part of the whole. And some of the energies that are coming at you, you're still seeing them as unique. And when you center yourself, it becomes part of the whole, and so they don't jump out in the same way. You won't have a sensitivity to it in quite the same way. Because when you're in that grounded, heart-centered, present space, then you're not going to feel any of that. You're not going to notice it in the same way. It will not feel overwhelming when you're in the heart-centered space. We guarantee it. If you go back to the head, all right, then, yeah, the head is creating the isolation of each of those signals.
Okay. And that'll help me to identify them when I'm able to calm them down a little bit. Okay, yes. Got it. Thank you. That was a big help. Thank you so much. All right. Our question comes from Lovey from the chat room. This is about her husband. He has 4 scars on his penis towards the base and wants to know what they are from. He believes his parents did that to him, and he's in turmoil because he can't remember because they forced him to have electric shock treatment at the age of 19. Could you please tell us what happened and if his family is part of what they call the Illuminati bloodline? And she says she also has a picture of him where his eyes are slits and that he looks a kind of reptilian in that picture. Could you help them out?
Well, we would say what you call that bloodline. Yes, there is some of that energy in the bloodline. There are 2 things we will say. The first thing is to deal with what is and what issues get triggered. Violation of space, violation of person. Those are the things that are really important to look at and the trauma that's being held. And more so than the story of what actually happened, the trauma is the first thing that has to be dealt with and healed and integrated before you can really get the story. All right? So, then... A little ringing again?
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message system. 2-1.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mrs. P.
So, as we were saying, the trauma is the very first thing that has to be dealt with because, to go down the story, as it were, it's not really going to take you where you want to go. It's going to trigger more fear. All right. We will give you a version, but we'll be honest, you're not even going to find peace with our version because it's you who needs to access the information inside. Remember what we said at the beginning here when we were talking about history, that it doesn't matter what anybody else is going to tell you about history unless you access it internally. And you have access to this information. You have access to these memories, and they will surface when you're ready. You will remember when it is appropriate. And if you're not accessing your memories right now, that's all right. Don't think something's terribly, terribly wrong. It just means that it's not important for you to know right now. Otherwise, you would know it consciously. Now, when we look at this, there were some procedures done. Some of them were on a ship. All right? Not the answer we know that you were expecting. So there were some procedures done on ship. On board as part of what we would call a hybrid project. So some of the scars are actually from that.
Okay. She's writing in there, how does he deal with that and that his father is blocking some treatment for him?
Well, it's looking at what's coming up for him. All right. In any sort of trauma that you have, what issues come up? Safety, security, abandonment. We would say abandonment really is in there because, his parents didn't behave in the way that he was hoping that they would behave and nurture him as a child or even as an adult. They're not showing up for me in the way that I want, and so I feel abandoned. So it's processing those emotions. And if he looks at the rest of his life, he will see that those things are there in multiple areas. It's not just in regards to his parents. So it's processing that. So, he can ask himself, we're giving broad strokes because we want everybody to know how to process themselves out of issues. Ask themselves what you need to know or what you need to do. And so if you have a thought, you can ask yourself what thought creates this tension, this fear. People don't support me. All right. What do you need to know or do? Perhaps it's to know that you are supported. It is to start using that affirmation, turn it upside down. Instead of people don't support me, I am supported. And then look at your life and see where you're not supporting yourself, where you're not giving that thing to yourself. If it's abandonment, people abandon me. All right. I'm always connected. It's impossible for you to be disconnected. It absolutely is. And then where are you not showing up for yourself? Where are you abandoning yourself? Where are you not honoring your needs? Where are you not using your voice to stand up for yourself? Where are you abandoning you? And then start taking steps, physical and energetic, to start showing up. All right? And you can all pick out one thing that you can do physically and one thing you can do energetically. In other words, working with an affirmation or feeling I'm connected, feeling I'm supported, feeling I support myself, I honor myself, I speak my truth. And then taking opportunities to do just that, having a conversation, not from a place of blame, but simply to say, this is how I feel. So we hope that helps.
I think it did. She's saying, I knew it and thank you so much. So, I hope, Lovey, that you take this and share it. And yes, it was very good information. Thank you, Mrs. P. And we have another question, and this is from Sun. I am not sick, but I am having a fever for some time. Is it related to new energetics?
Yes. and this is very common. It's something that many of you are seeing, especially for those of you who had a hard time being fully present in your body. You didn't really like being human, didn't really like being in the body. You may experience a very low-grade fever on and off as you are re-regulating yourselves. The body is going through a process, and the body has its natural immune system to purge things from the system. So you run a fever to get all the proper cells activated to clear out the body and to clear out things that shouldn't be in there. And so that's one of the ways that you do it, to cleanse the cells. It's not the only way, but there are times where you will choose to do it that way. And what we didn't get to answer in the previous question about the astrological and the alignments was the fact that you also are starting an upgrade. You upgraded yourselves, and now it's a new game. It literally is a new game. It would be like playing a video game and you completed a level and now you're moving up. And so that's why many of you over the course of the last month have felt sick. You have been purging your systems and releasing the toxins so that the cells can vibrate at a much higher rate than they have been. Many of you will also feel the need to work with your body in a different way, meaning exercise and movement. It may be that you need to exercise less, not necessarily more, and that instead of exercising, you need to sit still and be still within yourself. And it may also mean a change in diet, that there may be certain foods that you crave or foods that you really feel like you need to avoid, and to pay attention to that as well. At the end of the day, I'll say one last thing here, and that's at the end of the day, it's all vibrational. So however it shows up in the physical body, it doesn't really matter. So this is about clearing out the energetics and realigning, and just keep on repeating this process. We often recommend to many of you to set up alarms. You can create a toolbox of sorts for yourself so that you have things that you know you can do, exercises, visualizations, meditations, and that if you're feeling a bit off, that you pull out the book where you've put down a list of things you can do, or you pull out your phone, maybe you put it in your phone, or the alarm goes off, to remind yourselves, because when you get caught up in the hustle and bustle of things, you often forget, yes, I forgot I have this available, and I always feel better when I do it. I forget to use it.
Mrs. P, I'd like to add something here. One of the things that I have found over especially the last year, is that my body requires different things almost from week to week, even day to day. And I don't know if you are in alignment with this and you think this may help some people. But I have found that by really honestly learning to listen to my body and what it needs, that I feel better if, say I decide that I need to eat, like all vegetables for one meal of my day, that I have during the day, or that my fluid intake needs to be, doubled one day from the next, or that I need to eat earlier in the day and then later in the evening, or I just don't seem to be able to stay on a schedule. And when I say stay on a schedule, it's not about being in routine, but it's like there is no schedule anymore. It's like, throw out the rule book because it doesn't apply anymore, kind of a thing. It's learning to listen to what my body is requiring. Some days I only require 4 or 5 hours sleep. Sometimes 10 is not enough. And it's I've had to learn how to give myself permission to not be in that complete structure of routine of, eating at 8 o'clock in the morning and noon and then again at 4 or whatever it is, right? What is your take on that?
We are wholeheartedly in agreement. And it's really important for you all not to go to the, what's wrong? If, you're sleeping 10 hours and then you're sleeping 4, which is where all of you go to the negative, something must be wrong. But you are going through this process, this upgrade process, and it will be different day to day, hour to hour. And again, as you are paying more and more attention to frequency, you become more conscious of it, you're better able to know exactly what your needs are, and you're better able to acknowledge that. So we wholeheartedly agree with what you've said.
Good. And one last question here. We have a friend that is not feeling well, and we need to be able to give him some information on how to help him, and we're not quite sure what we can do to assist him. Do you have any assistance for that?
Well, the first thing we would say is to see him as being perfectly healthy, that there's nothing wrong with him, that he is this perfect, luminous being of light. And that helps those who are struggling to find the frequency. Because it really doesn't matter what label you give it, there is something that is out of alignment with the divine perfection that you are. And so it's resetting and recalibrating. So that's one way to look at it. The other thing we would say is hydration is an issue. And even with what he's getting, the support, be it energetic or, through vitamins and minerals and substances that he's putting in, he needs more hydration so that the body can do what it needs to do. There's not enough fluidity in the body. So that's really important.
Well, even if he's holding fluid?
Yeah, because there's part of him that needs to flush that. So it's almost like what he's got is stagnant. So, yeah, there's not enough fluid.
Okay, cool. That was most excellent. I so appreciate that, Mrs. P. I actually appreciate you and all of... I wish people could see what I saw. I've wished that for people many times. If you could just see who's all standing here and, listening to you and listening and supporting them, all of the listeners, including myself, and it's just the most beautiful sight. It really warms my heart, and I so appreciate you being here. I hope that we get to have you back on again very, very soon. We just love you. I love you, and I thank you so much for being here this evening.
It's such a pleasure for us as well, dear. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to connect with you all.
You bet, you bet. Well, until the next time then, Mrs. P, we're going to bid you adieu unless you have some final words, and we'd always love some final words from you before we invite Wendy in to say goodnight.
Well, the last thing we always like to tell you all is that you can connect with us directly. You don't need to go through Wendy. You can actually connect within. Just go into your heart center, ask your question and listen, and use your discernment, take the bits and pieces that resonate, and if you need confirmation, if you're looking for it, if you say, I think this is what I got, then we will put it in your path. And if you wonder, is something a sign, is it confirmation, if that idea or that thought goes to your mind, then take it as such. All right. So until then, we will be watching and waiting and sending many relationships.
Blessings to you, Mrs. P. Good night.
Hello.
Hello. Take a breath.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for bringing them with you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. We just love having you. I love having Mrs. P. and, quite the little troop that came in with her tonight. It was real fun. And I really appreciate you spending time at the first part of the show too, and just talking about your own experiences and, how, Mrs. P obviously, and the others, I talk about the Elohim just like you talk about the Mrs. P, but we also have others that also assist us, but they're, we each have our primary ones that have made the greatest impact upon us. And, her words are beautiful, and it's expressed through you and, your own personal growth and understanding. And so I want to take this opportunity, Wendy, and tell you thank you so much for all the work that you do and bringing her forth and all the time that you spend. And it really is pretty magnanimous. And so I really would like to recognize you for that.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca.
Seriously, I know it takes a lot of dedication to do what you're doing. So, before we leave here tonight, we've got a few minutes here, a couple minutes, so we can be nice and relaxed. Please let everybody know how they can get a hold of you, and I know you've got some events coming up that you might want to go ahead and repeat for those that may not have joined us at the beginning of the show that did not get to hear that wonderful pieces of information.
Yes, if you're looking for more information, you can find it on my website, and that's higherfrequencies.net, and frequencies is plural. And you'll find lots of good stuff on there. I do private sessions, and all that information and booking is available through the website. Coming up this weekend on Sunday, May 4th at 10 a.m., I'm doing a 2-hour online group session with the P's, the conversation with the P's. And again, that's online. And then on Tuesday...
my goodness, quickly.
May 6th, you can join us for the Soul Awakening Telesummit, and that's all on there as well.
Oh, I thought we had another minute or two. I was just saying, I'll be relaxed. Anyway, Wendy, thank you so much for being
thank you,
here.
Rebecca.
And thank you, everyone else. You go and have a great weekend. Wendy, goodbye and blessings. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.